Okay, welcome to today's webinar, everyone. Our topic is inhibitors to effective resource management. We'll be exploring why resource management is so tricky, what makes it harder, and what you can do about it. We'll take a couple minutes to talk about some logistical items while people are still joining us. We are targeting a 1-hour event today. We want to be courteous of people's time, leaving a full 15 minutes of that time to answer any questions you might have. All the lines are on mute, so if you try to ask those questions, you'll need to type them in. We'll be monitoring that Q&A box. If you see that on your screen, go ahead and enter any questions you have in that area. Some of your questions might get answered as we go along, but feel free to enter it there anyway, and we'll make sure we address it. We are recording today's session, and yes, you will get the recording and slides when we're finished. We get this a lot, so I'll say it again. Yes, we will be sharing what is covered today. We'll be seeing a lot of information, so don't feel like you have to memorize it all or take notes. You'll get it after the presentation. Just give us a day or so. My name is Lindsay Merrimont. I'm on the marketing team here at Keyed In, and I'm joined today by Randy Mislovic from RMI. That's the Resource Management Institute. They are a great resource to learn about resourcing and stay on top of what's new in a community forum. Randy is the managing director of RMI and a highly experienced professional with a wealth of knowledge in the field. Really lucky to have him with us today. Also with us today is Clayton Tagg, joining us from the UK. Clayton is a senior director of solutions here at Keyed In, one of the senior members of the team bringing over 20 years of experience in the space. Clayton works with many organizations to help them advance their project and resource management success, both through consulting and implementation of automation tools. He has a track record of success, so we got a good presentation in store for today. Here's some items we'll be covering. A number of topics are coming at us today. At a glance, we'll take a look, of course, at what inhibits us to effectively manage resources, what makes it challenging and why, using some data as well as expert insights to really dive into some of these things. Then we'll look at identifying automation support, what can and can't help you from an automation perspective, and walking away with some insights as to what to do about it. We'll wrap it up with some next steps on how to improve resource management practices and what that all looks like within a system. With that, I'll let Randy take us through the inhibitors to effective resource management.
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsay, for that really kind introduction. And get myself ready to go here. Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the webcast. I want to say thanks to Keyed In as well for the invitation to the Resource Management Institute, and I'm here representing them today. I'm Randy Mislovic, the Managing Director of the RMI. Resource management is arguably the hottest topic for PSA, PPM users, and of course, project-based businesses. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time today talking about some research that we recently did to really understand the inhibitors that are getting in the way of your conducting effective resource management when it comes to your project-based work. And just as importantly, what you can do about it. The RMI has been at this for roughly 4 years. Our parent company, RTM Consulting, does consulting in the space and has been at it more than 10 years. And so we're hoping you can get some value out of us sharing some perspectives on what your peer group is experiencing relative to resource management challenges, and again, very specifically what you can do about it. For those of you who are not familiar with the RMI, we are very simply an institute dedicated to the advancement of resource and workforce management, thought leadership, best practices, development of standards. We have globally recognized credentials in our resource management certification program. And we also have a ton of tools and resources that are available to our members and our certification graduates to help with more efficient management of human capital. We're working hard as well to build a community, and I want to thank Keyed In. They've been really helpful to us in that endeavor to bring together the best minds and the best organizations that really want to help the industry advance in a discipline of resource management. So we're making good progress in that regard. We have a website, it's resourcemanagementinstitute.com. We'd love for you to go visit us there when you have time. Best thing about the Institute, quite frankly, is you can join for free. and ask for just a little bit of information. You can opt out at any point in time you should desire. The Institute gives you opportunities to collaborate with your industry peers through events like this. We certainly run events through the Institute, such as our quarterly Power Up sessions that we run on topical things related to resource management. We have a ton of group and forum tools that are available to people through the community, white papers and other things on the subject. We have opportunities for you to innovate through both our certification program as well as the toolkit our graduates receive should you decide that you want to go through that program. And then lastly, opportunities to educate yourself, whether it's our full certification program or we recently introduced an introduction to resource management course for the more novice user. We have plenty of different ways for you to get educated on resource management. Essentially, we target and serve audiences that are doing project-based work. So the two particular constituencies we'll be talking about today are professional and consulting services teams, and secondly, our enterprise IT organizations conducting the internal IT operations for the companies that they work with. So that's a little bit about the RMI. We hope you come out and look at the website and join and participate with us going forward. The Institute resource management is, definitionally, I'd like to talk a little bit about that so we can hopefully be on the same page and provide all of you proper context for some of the commentary that I'll have as I go through some of our data and perspectives on these inhibitors. For nearly 20 years, the industry, and again, I'll speak to both professional consulting services and enterprise IT organizations, have been focusing on improving their project performance through improvements in their project processes, the tools that they use to support them, and a variety of other things. But yet 20 years later, data from a variety of sources, including our own, say the project performance in the industry is largely unchanged, meaning about a third of our projects today will fail at some level, meaning they will run over time, they'll run over cost, the quality won't be what we're looking for. Utilization continues in the industry to be lower than what it should be, and the unpredictability of that utilization continues to be a challenge for organizations, meaning we have these peaks and valleys of one month we've got great utilization and next month we have lower utilization. And as the Institute, in our just-in-time resourcing approach to this problem would indicate, we try to drive organizations toward very predictable use of their resources at benchmark levels. And then lastly, customer satisfaction is when we don't do our projects well, our customers, whether they are internal customers in our enterprise IT organizations or external customers to our professional consulting services organizations, suffer because we haven't fulfilled the desires of the project. And it really comes down to, quite frankly, four things that we have found through not only our own research, but research that we've taken from other sources. Is there are four things really getting in the way relative to effective project execution. One is the lack of an RM-specific process discipline, and I would separate that from having resource management addressed as part of my PM process is generally not adequate. I'll come back to that point. Continuity of RM-capable resources. Do you have good, skilled resource managers who have experience in doing this? Insufficient automation. So it's really important. You can't do this well without a really good PSA or PPM tool to help you to put to life, bring to life, and enable the processes that you've decided on for resource management. And last is the lack of effective RM education. One of the things we have addressed, we'd like to believe we've addressed with our certification program, is bringing structure and discipline to a commercial grade process for resource management, as well as structured education for resource managers. Just as project management has made substantial strides over the years through better education, better process development, and the RMI hopes to bring to resource management what other organizations have brought to project management. So we're going to talk about these things and how do we get resource management where it's working the way that we want it to. So we collected data in our market research from over 200 respondents. About 70% of those were in the professional consulting services space, the balance largely from enterprise IT, and a few that were largely in the field services organizations. But it's this data that starts to provide insights, and we've done 6 or 7 other research reports on various aspects of resource management that if you join the RMI, you can get access to. This data that I'm going through is the latest one. And today I'll be sharing some insights of your peer groups and hopefully helpful to you, some recommendations on how to address those inhibitors. So as I go into the data, just an important backdrop is that I'm going to show you at each question that we asked in our survey, in our research data, we consolidated the data between professional consulting services and enterprise IT, but we'll also show you comparative data between those 2 different groups so you can see how they compare to themselves in each area. One of the things, hopefully conclusions you'll draw from this, because the data doesn't lie, is that while for years these 2 different groups, PSCS and Enterprise IT, have considered their resource management needs quite different, in reality they are actually quite similar. While there certainly are differences, the number of similarities far outweigh those that are different. And the good news about that is that the Institute is trying to bring these 2 groups together to accelerate the rate and pace at which we're making improvements in processes surrounding resource management. So anyway, that's an important point to make. So I'll go to my first data slide, which is really important. It just, I'll say, starts at the high level. And where we ask a simple question, what's getting in the way? And about 2/3 people said, well, my tool's an issue. Another 2/3, by the way, people could answer more than one here, said I've got issues that related to process design and or implementation. And interesting, nearly 1/4 of respondents said I can't find the right kind of people to be responsible for running my resource management office, for being a resource manager. And so, key takeaway from this data is as simply as I'll talk about as I go through my commentary is addressing both process and technology together is an important part of the solution for all of you. And by the way, don't forget training, bringing your resource managers up to speed on a structured discipline approach to resource management. No different than teaching people how to execute any other process. Good training is important to that. So I'll do a quick flyby on the breakout of the data. So the same information broken out just with the professional consulting services people. You see largely a little less issues relates to process design, but at 57%, that's still pretty significant. But we will say professional consulting services got focused on this problem much earlier than enterprise IT organizations do, that now recognize how important this information is to their project execution. When it comes to enterprise IT organizations, you can see just jumped off the scale, 90% of them acknowledge that, hey, we haven't spent enough time thinking about the processes that we have around resource management. So they're, good news is they're focused on it now, and but still have some issues with the on the tool side as well. We'll break the tool side problems down for you as well to give you a view of how your peer groups are feeling about their automation tools. So in this particular part of the research, we asked people, when it comes to your current resource management process, what's the current state of that process? And so you can see about 34% of people said either it wasn't properly designed, it wasn't supported with good training, it wasn't implemented well, and then another 49% said it may have been a combination of those things or some other things we saw in the research data that were impacting them. But long and short here, 83% have one issue or more, and from our experience in interacting with many of these companies, is those issues are quite substantial, and they're working on resolving them in whatever manner that they can. So a lot of familiar themes here. One of the things that I'd like to share with the group is that as I talk my way through this, one of the most common things we see that is getting in the way as we think about some of these familiar themes is is too many organizations thinking about resource management as a tactical supply and demand matching process. Most organizations tend to look backwards 4 weeks as a view to what the next 4 weeks are going to look like. And they spend most of their time simply saying, here's the open projects I've got, who are the people that I can put on it to staff those projects. And that's where most of the momentum and effort from the organization goes in. And so the RMI would say that you need to think much, much more strategically with resource management. As we know, human capital, between the time it takes to budget for them, to recruit people, onboard them, train them, make them productive in your businesses, those things normally happen in cycles that are, in a most optimistic case, 2 to 3 months, and many times 4, 5, or 6 months long. And so you need time to be able to think and prepare for what the future capacity and skills mix needs of your businesses are going to be. And so we think about resource management much, much more strategically. It doesn't take away from the need to still staff tactically, but we try to drive organizations and think about it much, much more strategically. So change management is really important to putting these processes to life, and then, by the way, good documentation and good training, like any good process that you might put into your business. Not much difference when we looked at professional consulting services, the same set of questions. Their responses were almost identical. And the same thing was largely true for enterprise IT, although a higher percentage saying that their processes were not effective for a variety of other reasons. And and they topped 90% of respondents saying we got some issues with process. And as I alluded earlier, enterprise IT just got out of the gate a little bit late relative to focusing on this problem. The good news is the industry is focused on it now. So another area we explored was, okay, so you have issues. Where are you focused? Where are you going to spend your time? And I'd ask all of you to think about your own situations and what's getting in the way for you in more effective resource management. No surprise to us is 85%, virtually everybody said forecasting. Big issue. They spent too much time looking backwards. As I mentioned earlier, most organizations we talk to are using as their forecast what happened 4 weeks ago, and what they have is closed backlog in some way that's been summarized for them. For good forecasting, you need a good methodology for forecasting. You need a good PSA or PPM tool for this. You need good internal interlocks to interlock on the data that's going into those forecasts. So you're getting business inputs if you're an enterprise IT organization, sales giving data to professional consulting services. But we really encourage organizations to think of this in terms of 180-day forecasts. If you think that cycles of putting the right kind of people in place and reskilling, remixing your organization takes 3 to 6 months, and you got to have a forecast that gives you that kind of time horizon to look at what you're doing. Number 3 on this list was managing our skills inventory. I want to comment on that for a moment, simply because when you have a good forecast in place, then what you want to do is explode that with a skills inventory that tells you who you have, where they're located, what skills they have, what competencies they have. Are they on a project? When do they come off those projects? There's a lot of really valuable information in there, and combined with a great forecast gives you a really great view of where do I need to be 180 days from now, so that I can work with human resources and the managers of the delivery teams and figure out how do we reskill our organizations on a continuous basis to always be thinking forward 180 days and be where I need to be with plenty of time to plan for that. There's other things. When you're building a skills inventory, I've just shared that we learned from organizations as building a good skills inventory requires good proper design. Maintenance tends to be a big shortfall for most organizations, that I build a great skills database, but I don't take the time to have employees continue and update it. And by the way, it's becoming a great tool for a new hot topic in the industry known as employee engagement, is how do I use that database to capture people's career aspirations and desires for projects and try to match their desires for engagement with your organizations with your project needs. And more organizations need to be paying more attention to that. Again, not much difference in PS and CS and the enterprise IT organization, so I'll quickly fly by that. You're going to get a copy of this again from Keyed In as a result of your participation in the webcast today, so you can look at that breakout data at a later time. I want to move on to some thoughts about current tools. When we ask folks about their current automation tools that they're using, as you can see, a lot of room for improvement. Is 39% said, hey, we got things we need help with. 37% said somewhat effective and could be improved. 23%, almost a quarter, planning to replace their tool. There are a lot of I'll say older generation PSA PPM tools out there, and companies like Keyed In are very focused on your needs relative to more modern tools in this space, particularly resource management capabilities that are important to them. And so one of the things that, a few things I wanted to share here was, as you think about what happens with these, is it the tool or is it the process? And we would submit to you that as much as it's a tool, quite often it's not the tool, it's the process, where I've expected my tool to solve my resource management problem, and it just doesn't work that way. You've got to put a good set of processes behind you for forecasting, for skills mix management, for your skills database management, and other things that allow you to then take advantage of a good PSA PPM tool to better manage resource management. So anyway, so focus on better process design. We encourage organizations to use cases. So if you're picking a new tool, build your process and your workflows, and then put those into use cases, and force the vendors to show you how their tool is going to work in your environment. If you already have one of those tools, use those use cases then to help you with reconfiguring your tools to better enable the processes you set for yourselves in resource management. So, as we looked at the breakout between PS and CS, again, pretty familiar. Again, the PS vendors got more focused on process earlier in the game. The enterprise IT vendor users, again, a little bit more behind the curve on the process side, but I'd just say playing pretty quick catch up as well in regards to that. So current inhibitor says, you're thinking about your current situation, or if you're thinking about a new tool, this would be some really great data for you, because it shows you what your peer group's thinking about, as now that they're in their current state. And so when we ask people, they could answer multiple ways here. What are the things that are getting in the way relative to my tool? We got lax features, but integration, dashboarding, analytics, and configuration show up very frequently. Our consulting parent company sees those same four things over and over again. So key message to all of you is, don't buy feature sets. Focus on, again, what's the target process that I'm trying to get through? What are my workflows that I want to do? Build use cases to do that. And then think about these overriding things here that are represented on this page. Is how well will I be able to integrate with my front end and back end systems so that I can avoid data duplicity, and as well as quality of data issues. Look for great dashboarding. RM is a place where good dashboards can really accelerate your progress in your business. Data analytics has come up a lot. I'll talk a bit more about that here in a moment. And then a lot of times we see somebody's bought a good tool, they got a good process, they just have to configure the tool properly to get out of it what they want to do. So another place you can go look. Once again, we didn't see very much difference between the PS and CS users or the enterprise IT respondents. So we came to this one about current automation deficiencies. So we asked the question again is, so where are your user improvements and intended to be applied? And so people told us these things: forecasting and capacity planning. Again, no surprise there. Pretty much fall in line with what was getting in the way of some of the earlier data. They're going to focus on more dashboarding, data analytics, skills inventory. I can tell you, so our consulting company, we've been doing this for 10 years. Without exception, every time we went into an organization that wants to improve resource management, those two items, forecasting and the design and maintenance of the skills database end up being top of the list of things that they need to transform. It's not that there aren't other things they need to work on, but those two things, there's a lot to building the skills inventory. As an example is it's over engineering it or under engineering it. There's a real art to it, and making that skills database useful, making it so that it's easy to be maintained, and that it integrates nicely into the rest of your resource management or project management environments and the tool that you're using. So a lot to be gleaned there. We've got some great white papers and stuff out on the website about process things around this, and so I encourage you to check those things out on the RMI site. So again, not much difference between the PS and CS respondents and the enterprise IT respondents. A little more uniform on the enterprise IT side and the things that they listed here. But again, not huge difference from the consolidated data. And then the last piece of data I wanted to show you was the one around data analytics. So it was really interesting. We asked people that when if data analytics was an issue, what were you looking for? And two things jumped off the page for everybody. One was, I just need better integration of my data with my front end and back end. So if you're buying a new tool, make sure you're focused on that. And if you have a tool, this is a great place to get a lot more value out of the tool that you have and make your process work better for yourself. And the same thing's true on what if scenarios. Is if you believe what I shared earlier, that you got to be looking out 6 months out, and you put the building blocks in place to do that, particularly forecasting in a good skills database, you can start to use your tool to do these what if scenarios that are extremely valuable in helping us then get out the human capital redevelopment activities we have, recruiting, peak load work, the work with third parties, reskilling our organizations. So a lot that can be done there. So I hope you'll take some of those learnings because they'll really help you get more value out of your process and out of your tool. Again, not much difference between the respondents between enterprise IT and PS IT. So I'll go past those pretty quickly. And leave you with a couple of things that I hope will be helpful to you as I summarize a few points. And then I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of things at the RMI that may be of interest to you. The RMI, as it comes to, companies have made a lot of progress. We've been at this. So the RMI has actually been in existence for 2 years, the certification program for 4, but the parent company has been doing work in the space for more than 10 years. But companies still today have significant process and technology shortfalls to overcome to make resource management work the way it does. The good news is there's help out there in the form of good tools to help you automate these processes. And now the RMI is trying to drive the industry toward process standardization, better education and training to advance progress in the field. PSA, PPM, RPM decisions need to be preceded by better requirements planning. We encourage you, if you haven't bought a tool, you're thinking about it, get your target process down, your workflows down, build those use cases, work with those vendors to see who's the best fit for me to do that. And the better vendors, by the way, get this because they want their users to be happy with the sticky solution that they're going to hang around with and use for a long time and get value from. I'll close on the RMI with two things. Is we've got this great certification program. It's called the Resource Management Certified Professional. It's a 3-day long program. You can also do it in an online version that takes 2 hours a week for 6 weeks with a little bit of homework, and there is a certification exam. It's a first of its kind certification program for resource managers to learn best practices, gain access to our resource center, lots of tools to help you run your RMO better, and collaborate with your industry peers. In our short 2-year existence, we have nearly 200 member companies already in the program. All have put one or more people through this program. We say at some vendors, companies have put more than 100 people through our certification program. So to ask you to consider that, and you go to our website and learn more about the program to see if that's something that's of interest to you. And then lastly, I'd mentioned that we have our very first annual Global Symposium coming up in Dallas, Texas, October 3rd and 4th, where you have opportunities to meet with your peer companies. We're going to bring together experts from inside the RMI, outside the RMI. We have guest speakers from a variety of companies. RMCPs will be there. We've got a guest speaker from an ex-Gartner executive analyst coming to speak as well. But we're going to bring the people together for a day and a half to learn, collaborate, and innovate in resource management. It's $995 or a 20% early bird discount if you sign up before, I believe, June 15th. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the symposium and see if that's something that would be of interest to you. So with that, again, you can find more about us at resourcemanagementinstitute.com, or you can send a note to info@resourcemanagementinstitute.com, and we'll be happy to try to answer any questions that you have. And with that, Lindsay, I'll give you back the gavel.
Hi, sorry about that, everyone. Well, thank you, Randy, for that information. Really helpful to hear what the data represents. We're definitely not alone in some of these challenges, as we can see from some of the survey information, and looking forward to seeing you in Dallas too. So that should be a good one. Excited for that one. Just a quick introduction for those of you that are not aware who Keaton is, and I promise this is not a sales pitch. Trust me, our sales team can do much better than I can. But we provide solutions that help project and resource managers address the fundamental challenge of resource management. We focus on capacity and demand planning, utilization, scenario modeling that help assess the impacts of potential changes, some of the stuff Randy here talked about earlier. So go ahead and take a look, learn more. We have a unique model that addresses projects from the top down to ensure strategic alignment and prioritization of incoming requests. We combine that with a bottom-up functionality and usability for a system resources will actually use. We all know a system is only as good as the data that's in it, so we really try to make that user-friendly for resources and not an additional burden on people to update and maintain. And with that, I will pass it on over to Clayton, who will take us through some of the use cases that Randy outlined and what that looks like in real life from a user perspective.
That's great. Thanks very much, Lindsay and Randy. Again, thank you very much for that fascinating insight. I'd like to spend a few minutes now picking up on just some of the points that Randy called out. I mean, one of the things that really resonated with me was when we looked across all of the respondents in the survey, we saw that one of the largest inhibitors was automation tools to support the process. In fact, the thing that really popped off the screen for me was only around 2% of the overall respondents said their tool was effective and required no changes. Now, clearly, part of that is process, part of that is the tool itself. And we also saw that forecasting and capacity planning was one of the key areas for developing better processes. And so that's really where I'd like to focus in for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, just taking a look at how an automation tool like Keating Projects is able to help us in some of those areas. And I'm going to start first of all with that forecasting and capacity planning. I'm just going to jump in here and take a look at what effectively is a top-down resource forecast. And I'll just differentiate between top down and bottom up just for a second. By top down, we're talking about really the focus on demanding resource at the project level, perhaps fairly early on in the project's life cycle. In the case of perhaps PSCS, it could be maybe we are developing some kind of bid. It's early stage. We don't necessarily have a contract in place. In terms of maybe enterprise IT, this is something that's still very much a pipeline project. It's early days. We're not focusing at this point around getting individual named resources onto detailed tasks. That's something that maybe will come later. This is really looking at this from a top-down perspective and maybe starting to focus on the different types of roles that we're going to need to make this project happen. We could certainly work with named resources at this point if we wanted to. And we could also very much work with that all-important skills matrix that Randy was referring to. So it could be something very simple or more sophisticated, starting to identify either the technical or business skills that are going to go alongside this demand for a role from a particular team within the organization. And then what are we demanding? Well, we're putting together a picture of demand for resource effort, even in terms of hours, as I have here, or maybe we prefer to work in terms of days, or even simply in terms of full-time equivalents. So how many heads will I need? Will I need the whole head, half a head? Either on a month-by-month basis as we're doing here, or in perhaps going down to a little bit more detail week by week. We're not necessarily focusing on the detail of day by day just yet. We're still up at that higher level, that top-down strategic level around our forecast. There's a couple of other things to point out as we go along here, perhaps differentiating between how much of this demand is provisional and confirmed. Some refer to this as kind of penciled in soft demand versus hard demand. In the case of PSCS, this again may be identifying how much of this forecast we have coverage for in terms of a customer order or contract. So maybe up to the end of August, that's fairly firm demand. Beyond that, there is a picture of demand that I'm starting to fill out. I want the resource managers to have some upfront visibility of that, but it's not confirmed just yet. It's more provisional, more penciled in. So we're able to start to differentiate between those two different types of demand. There's all kinds of other things we can do whilst we're in here, starting to calculate out costs associated with resources, starting perhaps even to calculate what we're likely to charge out these resources for, perhaps in the case of PSCS, or maybe it's a cross-charge internally in the case of enterprise IT. Again, as Randy said, there are just so many similarities and crossovers between fundamentally those different industries. So once we start to build out a picture from a top-down perspective, it's also worth thinking about this demand picture from the bottom up. And Keating supports that very much as well. And so if I just jump out of the forecast for now, just leave that there, maybe jump across to something that I'm sure we're all very, very familiar with. It's the good old Gantt chart, a detailed picture of delivery for this project. And you'll notice, even down at this detailed level, we've also got information around resource demand. So Keating's a tool that supports building out that forecast of resource demand, either from that top-down perspective at a project level, or maybe from a more detailed level. Some organizations, PSCS is a classic example, will perhaps start with a more detailed plan of delivery and start resourcing at that level, but they want to be able to roll that up to those high-level forecasts, because as we're going to see fairly shortly, we can then take that high-level picture of demand into something of more of a strategic view, starting to get that 180-day visibility of forecast demand against our capacity. But I'll come on to that in just a moment. Before we do that, let's just look at this in a little bit more detail. We're starting here to think about the different types of resources, again, that we may require on a task-by-task basis. Here I'm, in this example, demanding resource again by role. Could we be assigning named resources straight onto these tasks? Yeah, sure, absolutely. And this all comes back to the process that the individual organization is following. Is this something around the project owner requests a resource, and then a resource manager is responsible for getting the right people onto the right projects at the right time? Or does that project owner own the resources, him or herself, and is able to assign those named resources directly to those tasks? Again, if we want to work with skills at this more detailed level, again, you're going to want to be able to say, okay, what type of skills do I require to make this piece of work happen, this task, this activity? And that's, again, going to very much help us in identifying the optimum type of resources that we want to get onto our project. So where do we take this from there? Well, again, I'm just going to focus back around some of the things that Randy called out. One of the things he mentioned towards the end of his section, he was talking about data analytics and identifying, or really the need or the ability to be able to quickly generate what-if scenarios. I'm thinking here about, again, something that really jumped out of the survey, that the governance of resource management processes is a key area for process improvement. So really what we want to be doing is starting from the very beginning, ensuring that we are using our precious resources to work on the right projects. And if we can do that in an environment where we can what if which resources are going to be on the right projects, then that's really something that's going to be of great benefit. So let's take a quick look at how a tool like Keating Projects can support that. I'm going to jump into an area just very briefly today that we refer to as portfolio analysis. This is all about that what-if modeling of where we should be focusing our resources and understanding the impact that that's going to have on our capacity to deliver from a resource perspective. Just very briefly today, what we can see here up at the top section, I've got a bunch of projects here that are included. Think of this as my committed portfolio of work. So if I'm a PS or CS organization, I'm thinking here really about customer projects that we've got contract for, that we're definitely going to be going ahead with. Their committed chunks of work, they're committed projects. If I'm more around an enterprise IT organization, and this is simply those internal projects that we have already committed to delivering, we're about to start, or perhaps are in flight. Towards the bottom of the screen, we've got the pipeline. Again, from the enterprise IT perspective, this is going to be those projects coming into the pipeline that we're considering doing, but as with all organizations of that nature, we've got more initiatives that we'd like to undertake than we have the ability to deliver. So we have to make some tough decisions. We have to consider that inbound pipe, or in the instance of the professional or consulting service organization, this excluded section, this pipeline, is more around inbound customer projects that perhaps are of a certain likelihood or percentage of going ahead. So this is potential future work. It's part of the book of work upcoming, but we've yet to get commitment to go ahead with it. So what we're able to do in this environment is use a various mix of measures, metrics, and attributes to help us prioritize the work that we're focusing on. That could be anything as simple as identifying how well a particular initiative aligns to the strategy of the business. We might be looking at risk. We might be looking at some of the metrics around what's it going to cost to deliver that particular piece of work versus what revenue we're going to generate. Or some organizations, particularly if it's internal projects, perhaps will start to leverage weighted scoring, understanding how different attributes are in a weighted way are going to help to prioritize that portfolio of work. And so it's very quick and easy in this what-if environment for organizations to be able to say, well, look, what if we took one of these pipeline initiatives and we said, what would happen if we went ahead with it? What would happen if we included it in the mix? Now, clearly, the metrics and measures certainly change at this point. There's more in the portfolio. It's going to cost more to deliver, perhaps generate more revenue. But I'm more focused today on understanding the impact on our ability to deliver. So I'm going to jump across to a capacity view and just very, very quickly explain what we see on the screen today. We're looking at the capacity of different types of resources within my organization. A tool like this understands how many people you have, what roles they perform, how many hours a week they work, and how much time ultimately they can spend on project-based work. And against that, there's a picture of demand. Where's the demand coming from? Well, it's coming from the projects in this particular what-if scenario. So there are 2 projects within the overall 6 in this what-if scenario that need people from the finance team there. If we drill into looking at implementation consultants, there are another, again, in the 2 projects, I'm looking at capacity there. We have 2 of our resources that are implementation consultants, but alongside that, then we have demand coming from 4 different projects for those types of resources. So all this is doing quite quickly and easily is it's identifying my capacity versus my demand in this what-if scenario, and it's identifying potential spikes. It's identifying potential peaks in that demand. So when we start to think about that 180-day forecast Randy mentioned, we think about when Randy was talking about spending too much time looking backwards and the need to look forward so that we've got the time and foresight to onboard and ramp up our resources. These are the types of views that we can start to leverage to understand that demand against capacity, very much looking forward across a period of months or potentially even years, and being able to do that in a what-if scenario. Moving on from there, I just want to focus, as I start to close now, on 2 more views that I think provide absolutely key insight to the modern resource manager. I'm just very, very quickly going to jump in here as one of my resource managers and look at what we call a capacity view. Line running across the top of the screen representing the capacity of what? The organization. It could be an individual department, a team. It could be a different unit of the business. That capacity could be factored in terms of identifying how much time the resources can spend on project-based work, we call it productive capacity. So not just you work a 40-hour week, but how much of that 40-hour week can you actually spend on project-based work? Again, whether it's internal projects or customer-facing. And then against that, we've got a picture of the demand. This time, we're not in the what-if scenario. This time, we're looking at the true demand. We're looking at the demand coming from the confirmed approved projects. This is the demand that we're going to need to satisfy. And alongside that demand, we've got a picture of the resources that we've started to allocate or supply to the projects to satisfy that demand. Now, there's all kinds of nuances and spin that we can put on this. We can perhaps start to break down a picture of that demand into provisional and confirmed. I touched on this earlier when we were looking at the forecasting at the project level, saying that you're able to break that demand down into how much of it is firm demand. Perhaps there's an order or contract in place, or it's perhaps a confirmed project versus what's more penciled in, what's more provisional. So we can start to get not only that forward-looking visibility, but we can start to really understand how much of it is firm versus more penciled in. And that's, as I say, something that we could be doing for perhaps an individual team, or maybe even drilling down all the way to an individual role. So whilst we look at the demand for my network engineers for this IT project, certainly is outstripping my capacity, I can actually see that the confirmed demand is below the capacity line. It's really only when I take into account that penciled in demand into the picture as well, that provisional demand, that actually things get a little bit hairy and we seem to have that spike there. One final thing just to think about today before I hand back to Lindsay is when we're thinking about the allocation of resources to the projects, how do we make sure we're getting the right people onto those right projects? How do we identify and resolve potential conflicts at the detailed level in a rapid dynamic environment? Well, that's just one final view I'm going to use Keyed In Projects to show you today. I'm going to jump in here again as one of my resource managers with slightly different viewpoints. I'm looking at here at what we call a resource plan. This is really for the team I'm responsible for, identifying perhaps the current utilization of the team, the all-important unpredictability around utilization that Randy was referring to, the peaks and troughs or peaks and valleys, and helping to iron those out. We need to understand where those peaks are, or perhaps where resources are perfectly loaded or indeed underloaded. Within a same view, it's very useful to be able to jump across and see how that utilization translates to remaining availability. So clearly fully utilized resources have no remaining availability, or maybe you want to understand how that translates into work currently allocated to your team of resources. Whether you're looking at it weekly as I am here, perhaps summarizing monthly, or drilling all the way down to a more detailed view on a day-by-day basis where we start to see some of those perhaps unpredictable peaks in the utilization. Gary seems to be overloaded. Why is that? Well, we want to be able to expand that out to start to understand which projects Gary's working on, what work assignments or activities he's been assigned to. And clearly here we can see by working on 2 different projects at the same time, that's what's causing that spike for Gary. Now, again, I could be looking at that for a whole organization, a particular business unit, team, or department. We could be looking at it role by role, or we could again start to bring in that all-important skills matrix, starting to understand this from a more skills-focused perspective. But for me, one of the most powerful pieces of this area is to be able to understand that inbound demand, see the projects that are asking me as a resource manager for my resources. This project at the top of the screen here is looking for a support analyst. It's looking for a support analyst to do something. This is the activity they need to undertake. So the $1 million question now here is, who within my team has got the availability to do this? Who's the best match for this? Who's got the right skills to work on this particular project as a support analyst? And it's something that very, very quickly and easily We can use the tool to narrow down that search. Certainly, we can drill into that search and tweak the criteria, focusing on different skills, different locations, different bands of time. But just very simply here today, the tool's returned that Mary is the only support analyst I've got that could potentially do this piece of work. She's got no work assigned in this period. So it's as simple as a drag and drop and assigning that piece of work to Mary. So Mary's now on that project. Not only is Mary on that project, of course, any automation tool worth its salt is now going to be notifying that individual that they've been assigned to that project. It's going to be notifying the project owner that Mary is going to be working on that project. And of course, it's going to go on and give Mary her own unique dashboard view where she can understand what she's supposed to be working on, and even go on to start to record things like actual time and filling in timesheets and all of that great kind of actual stuff that really feeds back into the forecasts that we started with back at the beginning. So I've moved through that very quickly today, just spent 10 or 15 minutes looking at that. I really just, as I said at the beginning, wanted to pick up on some of the key points that I took away from what Randy was telling us earlier, in that automation tools are one of the largest inhibitors to supporting the process, and that within that areas for developing better processes, forecasting and capacity planning absolutely jumped off the page as one of the key areas for process improvement. So Lindsay, I think that's probably enough from me. I'll hand back to you and see what questions have come in from the audience today.
Yeah, thank you, Clayton. That was very good insight. If anyone on the line would like to hear more, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you to contact us and go ahead and we can set up a full product demonstration. I know Clayton covered a lot of stuff very quickly, so if you would like to see more, go ahead and email info@keyedin.com. There's some contact information for Randy as well. Again, go ahead and answer those questions into the Q&A box if you have any questions over any portion of the presentation today. And now is your chance to get those answered. Okay, the first question today. Randy, I know you covered this to some degree, but we get this a lot, so I'm really happy it actually got asked. Someone's asking, process or automation, which do you recommend starting with? They do go hand in hand, and again, I know we talked about this briefly, but just want to cover that very clearly from the start.
So thanks for the question, Lindsay. Yeah, we get it a lot too. In most organizations, I think, approach this from the standpoint of they've got some target idea, some target process that they've been operating with for some period of time, and they're trying to automate that. Where we generally see people falling short is that the extent to which they've actually designed their process around resource management in particular as input to then selecting the right tool to support it, and or reconfiguring the tool that they have to better support it for whatever it is. So people agree with our point of view that resource management is a lot more than just tactical supply and demand matching over the next 30 days. You have to do what I've been talking about, what Clayton talked about, is you've got to look out a lot longer, 3 to 6 months. So you need a forecasting methodology around that. You need to develop the right kind of a skills base that you can bang that forecast against. You need analytical tools. So, Clayton was showing an example of a what-if scenario as an example so that I can start to take the data and learn from it and make it actionable for me. So long answer to the short question is we think process definitely precedes making a tool choice, but many of you find yourself in a situation where, okay, I think I've got a good tool. How do I get more out of it? How do I make resource management more effective? And a lot of times it's getting back to that process and then saying, okay, sitting down and saying, how do I reconfigure my tool to get more out of it that I want to have? So anyway, that's how we think about it.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for providing that information again. I think it is really helpful to consider both areas as you're going through some of this stuff and implementing changes. So helpful to hear that confirmation. Another question came in: how is the skills assessment collected in the tool? Clayton, I think you'd be able to address that one.
Yeah, I certainly will, Lindsay. It's a great question. I mean, the great news with tools like Keating Projects is the flexibility. Flexibility in terms of what information you're capturing around the resources. Yeah, skills for sure. And that could be not only the business and technical skills, it could be perhaps around skills proficiency, it could be years of experience around the skill. How the skill is collected within the tool is one thing, and certainly you're going to want that flexibility and configurability in terms of what information you capture. And then, of course, guess what? We're coming back to process again. We're coming back to the process of capturing and updating the skills, and that's almost more of the challenge. Certainly, we find when we roll out a tool like Keating Projects, an organization needs to go through a process of capturing those skills and getting them into the tool. That's one part of it. That's kind of one step in the process. The key challenge then going forward is keeping that up to date. Who's responsible for updating the skills? Is it the individual resources themselves? Is it the users? Are they responsible for saying, hey, I now believe I've got this skill, or I believe I'm more proficient at that skill? Is it the line manager who's more responsible for filling in that information? Is it someone within HR that's responsible for it? From a tool perspective, it'll absolutely lend itself to any of those users being responsible or able to capture that information. It really, again, comes back to the combination of tool and process. Who's responsible from a process point of view is another conversation, and I'm sure that's something that Randy and his colleagues could absolutely help an organization with in terms of that initial capture and then that update process around that skills matrix. Okay, any other questions come in for us today, Lindsay?
There's one about who does the assessment, management or self-assessment, or is it based on grade level?
Yeah, again, it kind of expands on what I was just saying. I think that's more of a process question. I mean, Randy, have you got anything to perhaps jump in on here in terms of who the best people within the organization are to tackle this?
Yeah. So generally, you have between the delivery teams and the resource management office are working together on a skills database design. As I mentioned earlier, the maintenance of it's really important. We see people spend tons of time building a database out of the gate, and then it hasn't been touched in a year, and a year later, it's not really worth anything. The real whole idea, what's most common that we see organizations do is they come to a combination of everybody who's got useful, billable, or productive skills goes in a database, so it doesn't matter about their grade or anything else. Usually, though, we find most effective is some kind of a self-assessment where people are required to, if they've taken a class, to update their database, if they've learned some new skill, that they're responsible for updating it. But there is some kind of management oversight, meaning the manager of that person on some kind of a repetitive basis goes and looks and sees what they've done to update their skills database, to include, by the way, their career aspirations and things that they're capturing that. I mentioned the employee engagement thing a matter earlier. So it's a combination of the employee doing some kind of self-assessment, the managers doing some kind of, I'll say, a review to make sure that they agree on the self-assessment and make sure the person's actually doing it. And then there's some kind of governance, by the way, sitting on top of this. It's typically done by the RMO. The Resource Management Office is saying that, of our population of 500 people, how many completed their self-assessment, how many updated it within the 90-day window that they asked them to update it, every so often, or whatever window you might happen to have wanted that to be. But this is a place organizations fall down. Either they got a bad skills assessment design, or they design something well, get it populated, but then they fail to maintain it. And we find a combination of self-assessment with management oversight, and then governance from the RMO is key to this. This is something, by the way, you can dashboard too, that I've seen done very effectively.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Someone else is asking if there's access to this data very quickly. Wanted to say yes, we will be sending out the information that was covered today. So you will be able to take this and noodle on it and slice it and dice it however you want to see it. So definitely want to say that. I think that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Randy, for joining us and providing all those really good insights on this information. Clayton, thank you so much. Yeah,
it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yep. Thank you, everybody, for your time this morning. Really appreciate you spending your morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you with us.
Thanks, everyone.